She bought an old camper van and turned it into a motorhome. But what she found inside shocked everyone. Sarah Miller had always dreamed of having total freedom to travel across the United States, exploring every corner of the country without hurry and without fixed commitments. At 32, after working as an architect in New York for nearly a decade, she decided it was time to realize this old dream she had kept in her heart since childhood. That's when she saw the online ad for a 1978 camper van being sold for a price that seemed too good to be true. The seller, a man named Greg, seemed nervous throughout the phone negotiation and insisted the sale be done quickly, without many questions. "Look, miss, I need to get rid of this camper van today," said Greg when they met in the parking lot of a gas station on Interstate 95. "I can't keep it anymore, understand?" Sarah found the man's hurried manner strange, but when she saw the vehicle, she was enchanted. The camper van had white bodywork with yellow details faded by time, but its structure was surprisingly solid. The little curtains on the windows were torn, the back seats covered by a floral fabric from the 80s, and the dashboard showed clear signs of heavy use. "Does it still run well?" asked Sarah, running her hand over the bodywork affectionately. "Yes, it does. The engine was serviced 2 years ago. It just has a few electrical things to fix, but nothing too serious," replied Greg, constantly looking around as if expecting someone to arrive at any moment. The deal was closed in 20 minutes. Greg quickly signed the documents, took the money, and literally ran off. Sarah stood there, holding the keys to her new home on wheels, not quite understanding what had just happened. But the joy of finally getting her camper van outweighed any suspicion. During the first week, she dedicated herself to getting to know the vehicle better. She took it to a trusted mechanic in Newark, the city where she had rented a small workshop to do the initial repairs. Mr. Arthur, the mechanic, was a 60-year-old man who had worked his whole life with Heritage Motors and knew every bolt of those cars. "This one is well preserved inside, girl," commented Mr. Arthur, after giving it a general look. "Whoever took care of it knew what they were doing. I'll just fix up the brakes and the electrical part, then you can travel peacefully." While waiting for the repairs to be completed, Sarah began planning how she would transform the camper van into her motorhome. She had studied architecture precisely because she loved designing spaces, and now she would have the chance to create her perfect home in just a few square feet. She drew several floor plans on paper, thinking about every detail. She wanted a comfortable bed that could turn into a sofa during the day, a small kitchen with a stove and refrigerator, space to store clothes and her work materials. She also dreamed of shelves for her books and a little corner for her guitar. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. At the end of the second week, Mr. Arthur delivered the camper van running perfectly. Sarah drove to the workshop she had rented and began dismantling the back seats. It was work that required patience, as many of the screws were rusted with time. When she finally managed to remove the rear bench seat, she noticed that the floor in that area had a different color than the rest. It seemed someone had replaced only some plywood planks, creating a kind of square in the middle of the original floor. Curious, she took a screwdriver and began carefully lifting those planks. To her surprise, she discovered they weren't just propped up, but formed a lid that concealed a secret compartment, carved into the very chassis of the camper van. Inside the hiding place was a rusty metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, but deeper. Sarah Miller carefully removed the box and placed it on the workshop bench. Her hands trembled with anxiety as she opened the lid, which let out a protesting metallic creak. The contents of the box left her completely speechless. There were dozens of letters yellowed with time, all handwritten in careful script. Along with the letters were old black and white photos, some faded color ones from the 80s, and 3 birth certificates, folded and worn by time. The first letter Sarah opened was addressed to "My love David," and was signed by "Your eternal Martha." The date at the top of the page indicated October 1983. The letter spoke of a trip they would take together through the Pacific Northwest, visiting relatives and seeing new places. "David, my dear, I can hardly wait for us to begin our adventure tomorrow. The camper van is loaded with everything we need, and the children are excited to see Grandma's house in Aspen. You were the best gift life gave me, and now we can show our little ones the entire United States." The other letters followed the same romantic tone, but as Sarah read on, she realized something different was happening. A letter from December 1983 showed a worried Martha talking about problems we didn't expect and the need to find a safe place to stay. The photos told a parallel story. The first ones showed a young couple smiling next to the same camper van that now belonged to Sarah. The man had dark hair and a mustache. The woman was blonde with light eyes and a sweet smile. In the following photos, 3 small children appeared, 2 girls and a boy playing around the vehicle. One photo in particular caught her attention. It showed Martha pregnant, leaning against the side of the camper van, with an expression on her face that mixed happiness and worry. On the back, someone had written, "Together forever even when apart, December 1983. The birth certificates were for the couple's 3 children: Alice June Miller Thompson, born in 1979, Charles David Miller Thompson, born in 1980, and Mary Martha Miller Thompson, born in 1982. All had David listed as the father and Martha as the mother, and they had been born in different small towns in the interior of New York. At the bottom of the box, Sarah found an old road map of the United States, all scribbled on and marked with a red pen. There were circles around various small towns in the states of the Pacific Northwest and Mid-Atlantic, with dates noted beside each one. The dates ranged from January 1984 to June of the same year, and then stopped abruptly. The discovery left Sarah completely intrigued. Who were these people? What had happened to them? Why were their personal belongings hidden in the camper van? And most importantly, where were they now? During the following days, she couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious family. She searched the internet for the names on the birth certificates, but didn't find anything very specific. They were names that were far too common, and the information available online about people from that time was very limited. She decided to visit the registry office, where the children had been born, in a town called Princeton, in the interior of New York. The registry office clerk, a middle-aged lady named Mrs. Gable, was very helpful, but couldn't provide much information beyond what was already on the certificates. "Look, dear, I don't remember this family," said Mrs. Gable, examining the documents, "but I can see here in the system that the records are authentic. The problem is that in the 80s, a lot of people moved from town to town without leaving a forwarding address. It wasn't like today where everything is recorded on the computer." Sarah Miller asked if there was any way to track where the family might have moved, but the answer was discouraging. The information systems of that time were precarious, and many address changes simply weren't documented. Determined not to give up, she looked for other approaches. She went back to the letters and began reading each one more carefully, looking for clues about places they had visited or people they knew. In one of the letters, Martha mentioned an aunt who lived in Lake Placid and talked about how the children loved playing in the snow during the winter. In another, David wrote about a cousin who worked at a factory in Flint and could help them find a job. Sarah noted all these details in a notebook and began organizing a real investigation. She marked on a map all the places mentioned in the letters and decided she would visit each one personally. The first stop would be Lake Placid, where Martha's aunt supposedly lived. It was a shot in the dark, but it was the only concrete starting point she had. The trip to Lake Placid took 3 hours by road. Sarah arrived on a Friday afternoon and decided she would spend the entire weekend in town looking for information. Since she didn't have a specific name for the aunt, her strategy would be to ask at the town's oldest establishments. She started at the Main Street Bakery, a place that had been operating since the 50s according to a sign at the entrance. The owner was an older German gentleman named Klaus, who spoke English with a thick accent but was very willing to help. "The Miller-Thompson family, you said?" Klaus scratched his head, thoughtful. "Well, yes, there was a family with that name who used to come here in the 80s. The woman was blonde, very pretty, and always came with 3 small children. They stayed at a lady's house up in Beverly Hills." Sarah's heart raced. It was the first concrete lead she had gotten. "Do you remember the name of the lady who hosted them?" "Oh, my dear, after so long it's difficult, but I can tell you one thing. She still lives there. It's Aunt Joan, a lady who must be about 80 years old now. Her house is the blue one with the white gate, just after the curve on the way up to Beverly Hills." Sarah thanked him profusely and ran out toward the neighborhood Klaus had indicated. Beverly Hills was in a higher part of town, with old, well-kept houses. It wasn't hard to find the blue house with the white gate. Aunt Joan answered the door, and Sarah introduced herself, explaining that she was researching a family that might have stayed at her house in the 80s. The lady, indeed a spry 80-year-old, invited Sarah in for coffee. "Martha Miller Thompson, let me think," murmured Aunt Joan, pouring coffee into a delicate porcelain cup. "Honey, you've touched a wound that never properly healed." Sarah felt she was about to discover something important. "You knew her?" "I did, and it was one of the saddest situations I've ever witnessed in my life." Aunt Joan sighed deeply. "Martha was my niece, my sister's daughter, who died young. She came here a few times with her husband and their 3 little ones. They were a beautiful family, you know. Very close, very loving." "What happened to them?" "It was in 1984. I remember it like it was yesterday. Martha showed up here in the middle of the night alone with the 3 children, crying hard and saying she had to leave urgently. She said David had disappeared and that bad people were looking for her." Aunt Joan paused, clearly emotional at the memory. "She stayed here only 2 days. I begged her to stay longer. The children were scared. They didn't understand anything. But she said she couldn't put us in danger. On the morning of the 3rd day, she left early with the children and I never saw her again." "Didn't you try to look for her afterwards?" "I tried, of course I tried. I went to the city where they lived, talked to neighbors, searched everywhere. But it was as if they had vanished from the face of the earth. To this day, I wonder what happened to my great-nieces and nephews." Sarah showed the photo she had found in the box. Aunt Joan immediately began to cry upon recognizing the faces. "My God, it really is them. Look how big Charles was, and the girls—" She picked up a photo where the children were playing in the backyard. "This photo was taken here at my house, I remember that day. Martha said she wanted a keepsake of us, that it might be a while until they came back. Do you have any idea where they went when they left here?" "Martha mentioned she was going to try to get to Seattle, where a childhood friend lived. She said they could be safe there until things calmed down, but that's over 40 years ago, dear. I don't even know if that friend is still alive." Sarah spent the rest of the weekend talking with Aunt Joan, who told her everything she remembered about Martha and the family. The story that emerged was of a young mother in love with her husband and completely devoted to her children, but who was forced to flee due to circumstances no one fully understood. "She never told me exactly what was happening," confided Aunt Joan. "But from her manner, the way she kept looking over her shoulder all the time, I knew it was something serious. Martha wasn't one for drama, you know. If she said they were in danger, it's because they really were." Before leaving, Aunt Joan gave Sarah a photo she had taken of the children playing in her backyard. It was from December 1983, just before everything started to go wrong for the family. "Take this photo, dear. If you manage to find them, I want them to know that Aunt Joan never forgot and always hoped to see my little grandchildren again one day." The drive back to New York was full of reflection. Sarah was now certain she had stumbled upon a real and very sad story. A family that had been torn apart by mysterious circumstances and likely never knew what happened to each other. The next clue led to Seattle, where Martha had supposedly sought refuge with a childhood friend. But Seattle was a big city, and looking for someone without even having the person's name seemed like an impossible mission. She decided to try a different approach. She returned home and began researching online archives of newspapers from that time, looking for news that might be related to the disappearance of the Miller-Thompson family. It wasn't easy, as most local newspapers from the 80s weren't digitized, but after hours of searching, she found a small note in the Princeton newspaper from March 1984. "Family disappears after house fire." The home of the Miller-Thompson family, in the Newbury neighborhood, was completely destroyed by a fire in the early hours of Sunday. Neighbors reported seeing suspicious people lurking around the property in the days prior. The family's whereabouts are unknown. Sarah felt a chill. Now she was beginning to understand why Martha had fled in such a hurry. Someone had burned their house down, probably as a message or a threat. But who would do such a thing? And why? She decided to go back to Princeton and look for the street where the family's old house was. Maybe some long-time neighbor would remember something. Newbury was a modest neighborhood, with small houses and narrow streets. Sarah found the address listed in the newspaper article, but a small business now stood on the site. She asked some older neighbors, and a lady named Mrs. Higgins remembered the family. "Oh, what a good family they were," said Mrs. Higgins, shaking her head sadly. "Martha was a golden girl, always polite, always willing to help everyone. And the children, what beautiful children. Do you remember what happened?" "Yes, I remember. It was a very strange thing. Some men started showing up around here, asking about the family, saying that David owed them money. Martha was terrified. She said her husband had disappeared and that she knew nothing about any debt. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. And then came the fire. It was the same week. The night before the fire, Martha came to my house, asking me to watch the children for a few hours. She was very nervous, said she needed to take care of something urgent. When she came back, she picked up the children and said they were going to spend a few days at a relative's house. Mrs. Higgins paused, as if reliving those difficult moments. The next day, early in the morning, the house was on fire. The firefighters said it was arson. Someone poured gasoline and set it on fire. Martha and the children never came back. Do you think they were being threatened? I'm sure of it. Those men who came looking for David were not good people. You could see it in their faces. Martha was a hard-working, honest person. If she ran away like that, it's because she was very scared. Sarah thanked her for the information and left with a heavy heart. The story was getting sadder and sadder. Martha had lost not only her husband, but also her home and her safety. She had to flee with 3 small children, with no money, no home, not knowing if she could ever return to her normal life. That night, back in her apartment in New York, Sarah found herself looking at the photos of the Miller-Thompson family spread out on the kitchen table. There was something in those smiling faces that touched her deeply. Perhaps it was the innocence of the children, who were not to blame for anything that was happening. Or perhaps it was the expression of genuine love between Martha and David, a love that was interrupted so abruptly. She decided she would keep looking. She didn't quite know why, but she felt she needed to find out what had happened to that family. Maybe it was just curiosity, or maybe it was a way to give meaning to the discovery she had made in the camper van. Her next step would be to try to trace the children through adoption records. If Martha had really disappeared, or couldn't take care of the children, it was likely they had been placed with foster families. She began by searching the public records of various courthouses in cities in Oregon, following the clue that Martha had gone to Seattle. It was a time-consuming and frustrating task, as most archives from that era were not yet digitized. After 2 weeks of fruitless searching, she decided to try a more direct approach. She placed ads in newspapers in cities in the Pacific Northwest and Mid-Atlantic, asking for information about the Miller-Thompson family. She also created a social media page with the photos she had found, hoping someone might recognize them. The response came faster than she expected. 3 days after placing the first ad, she received a call from a man named Charles, who said he believed he was one of Martha's children. "I saw the ad in the Des Moines newspaper," he said, his voice choked. "I'm almost certain I'm the Charles David you're looking for. I was born in 1980 and was raised by an adoptive family from the age of 4. Sarah could hardly believe it. They arranged to meet the following weekend in Des Moines, where Charles lived and worked as a mechanic in a shop specializing in classic cars. The meeting was emotional. Charles was a man in his early 40s, tall and strong, with the same face shape that appeared in photos of his father. When Sarah showed him the old photographs, he began to cry. "It's really her, it's my mother," he said, holding a photo where Martha was holding a 2-year-old boy on her lap. "I vaguely remember her face, and I've always had this image in my head without knowing where it came from." Charles recounted that he had been found alone at a bus station in Seattle in 1984, crying and saying he was looking for his mother. The authorities couldn't locate any relatives, and he was sent to an orphanage and later adopted by a family from Des Moines. "I always knew I was adopted. My adoptive parents never hid that from me. But I had no information about my biological family. The orphanage documents only said I had been abandoned, but I was always sure that wasn't exactly what happened. Why did you think that? Because I remembered some things. I remembered a blonde woman who sang to me. I remembered 2 girls who played with me. I remembered a big car where we sometimes slept. My adoptive parents thought they were just childhood dreams, but I always knew they were real memories. Sarah showed Charles all the letters she had found. He was moved reading the affectionate words Martha wrote to David, speaking about the children with so much love. "She didn't abandon us, did she?" asked Charles with tears in his eyes. "Something happened that forced her to leave us." "From what I've discovered so far, she really didn't abandon you. I think she was trying to protect you from something, but ended up getting lost along the way." Charles was silent for a few minutes, processing all that information. "I need to find my sisters," he said finally. "I need to know what happened to them, if they're okay, if they remember me." "Let's look together," said Sarah. "I have all the information I found about your family. With your help, it might be easier to track down your sisters." Charles showed he was willing to do anything to find Alice June and Mary Martha. He asked for a few days off work and joined Sarah in the search for his lost sisters. They began following the same strategy of placing ads in newspapers and creating social media pages. But now they had an advantage. Charles could provide details that only someone from the family would know, which gave more credibility to the ads. The first response came from Alice June, the eldest daughter. She lived in Seattle, was married, and worked as a teacher at a public school. When she was contacted through social media, she initially thought it might be some kind of scam. "I've received so many messages over the years from people saying they knew my family," Alice June said during the first phone conversation. "It always turned out to be lies, people trying to take advantage or confused people who mistook me for someone else." But when Sarah described specific details from the photos and letters, Alice June began to believe it might be true. "You said you have a photo where we're playing in the backyard of a blue house." "Yes, I do. It's a photo taken in Lake Placid at Aunt Joan's house." Alice June was silent for a long moment. "I remember Aunt Joan. She made a delicious carrot cake and had a black cat named Snowball." It was exactly what Aunt Joan had told Sarah. There was no longer any doubt that they had found Martha's eldest daughter. The reunion between Charles and Alice June took place in a square in downtown Seattle on a sunny Sunday morning. The two recognized each other immediately, even after more than 40 years apart. "You've grown so much," said Alice June, hugging her brother tightly. "But your eyes are just like Dad's." "And you look exactly like Mom when she was young," replied Charles, also emotional. Alice June shared that her story had been a bit different from Charles's. She remembered their parents and the last days before the family separation more clearly. "I was 5, so I have more memories. I remember Dad leaving the house one morning and never coming back. Mom was very worried. She cried in secret, but always tried to seem strong in front of us." "And then?" "Then those bad men came looking for Dad. Mom got very scared and said we were going on a trip to visit Aunt Joan, but I could tell it wasn't a normal trip. She was very nervous." Alice June remembered the stay in Lake Placid and Martha's decision to go to Seattle to look for her childhood friend. "We stayed a few days at the house of a woman named Mrs. Brenda, who was very nice to us. But Mom was getting more and more desperate because she couldn't find work and had no money to support us." "And that's when you were separated?" "Yes. One day Mom took us for a walk in downtown Seattle and said she was going to leave us with some very good people who would take care of us while she sorted out some problems. She said she'd come back soon to get us." Alice June began to cry as she recalled that moment. "I never saw her again. I was in a foster home for a few months until I was adopted by a wonderful family that gave me all the love in the world. But I always wondered what had happened to Mom, why she never came back for us." The two stories complemented each other and confirmed that Martha had truly been forced to give up her children, not from lack of love, but out of desperation and lack of options. Now they needed to find Mary Martha, the youngest daughter. If she had been separated from her siblings in 1984, when she was only 2 years old, she probably had no memories of her original family. The search for Mary Martha proved more complicated. Alice June and Charles had no information about what had happened to their younger sister after the separation. All they knew was that she had been directed along with them into the Seattle foster care system, but after that, the trail went cold. Sarah suggested they look in the official records of the state of Oregon. With the help of a lawyer specializing in adoption issues, they managed to access some files showing that Mary Martha Miller Thompson had indeed passed through the Seattle foster care system in 1984. According to the documents, she had been adopted by a family living in a small town in the interior of the state, but the town's name was illegible due to the poor condition of the paper. "We'll have to go archive by archive, courthouse by courthouse," said the lawyer. "It's painstaking work, but if she was really adopted in Oregon, we'll find the records eventually." Charles requested a few more days off work, and Alice June managed to get leave from school. The two joined Sarah in a full-scale investigation operation, visiting courthouses and public offices in dozens of small towns in rural Oregon. It was Alice June who had the idea to also search the name change records. If Mary Martha had been adopted very young, it was likely her adoptive parents had changed her name to something that fit better with the new family's surname. The lead proved correct. In the courthouse of a town called Pella, they found the name change record for Mary Martha Miller Thompson to Mary Martha Harrison in 1985. "Now we just need to find out if she still lives here or moved somewhere else," said Alice June, hopeful. Pella was a small town with just over 50,000 inhabitants. It wasn't difficult to locate the Harrison family in the phone book. According to the information, Joseph Harrison and his wife Miriam had adopted a girl in 1984 and lived on a farm on the outskirts of the city. The phone call was tense. Sarah Miller explained the situation to Mrs. Miriam, who was initially suspicious and protective of her adopted daughter. "My daughter has spent her whole life wondering about her biological family," said Mrs. Miriam. "But she has already suffered so much from this story. I don't want you coming here to raise hopes that will later come to nothing." "I understand your concern," replied Sarah. "But I can assure you we have concrete proof. I brought photos, documents, letters written by her biological mother, and I found her two brothers who are desperate to see their younger sister again." After much discussion, Mrs. Miriam agreed they could come to the farm, but asked them to be careful in their approach. "Mary Martha is a sensitive person. This story of having been abandoned has always been an open wound in her life. If you're going to stir this up, it has to be to resolve it for good, not to hurt her more." The drive to Pella took 4 hours. Charles, Alice June and Sarah traveled together, talking about their expectations and fears regarding the meeting. "What if she doesn't want to meet us?" asked Charles. "What if she's happy the way she is and we just end up disturbing her?" "Then we respect her decision," answered Alice June. "But at least she'll know she has brothers who always thought of her, who never forgot." The Harrison farm was on a dirt road, surrounded by soybean and cornfields. The house was simple but well kept, with a garden full of flowers and some chickens pecking in the yard. Mary Martha greeted them on the porch. She was a woman in her early 40s, with light brown hair and green eyes. Despite her age, she still had delicate features that recalled the little girl in the old photos. "So you think you're my siblings?" she asked, not showing much emotion. Sarah showed the photos and the birth certificates. Mary Martha examined everything carefully, but maintained a closed expression, as if protecting herself from possible disappointment. "I don't remember anything from that time," she finally said. "I was very young when I was adopted. My parents always told me I was abandoned at a church, that no one knew who my biological parents were." "You weren't abandoned," said Charles, approaching slowly. "Our mother was forced to leave us because of a very difficult situation. She didn't want to abandon us, she wanted to protect us." Mary Martha looked at Charles's face and then at Alice June. Something in her eyes changed, as if a distant memory was trying to surface. You used to sing a song to put me to sleep." Alice June began to softly sing an old lullaby. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Mary Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I remember that song. I always knew I knew that song from somewhere, but I didn't know where. It was the moment that broke down all barriers. Mary Martha hugged her siblings for the first time in 40 years, and the three of them cried together on the porch of that simple house in the Oregon countryside. "I always felt like there was a part of my life that was missing," confessed Mary Martha. "My adoptive parents are wonderful. They gave me an incredible family, but there was always a void I couldn't explain." They spent the rest of the day talking, sharing stories of their lives and trying to reconstruct the lost memories. Mary Martha said she had married young to a neighbor from the farm, had 2 teenage children, and led a simple, happy life in the country. "But I always wondered if my biological mother was still alive somewhere," she said, "if she ever thought of me, if she regretted leaving me." "She never regretted it," Alice June assured. "From the letters Sarah found, you can see she loved us very much. What happened wasn't her choice." It was Charles who raised the question everyone was thinking, but no one had the courage to mention, "And our mother? Do you think she could still be alive?" It was a difficult question to answer. Martha would be about 80 years old now if she were still alive. 40 years was a long time, and she had disappeared under very precarious circumstances. "We could try to look for her," suggested Mary Martha, surprising everyone. "Now that we've found each other, maybe it's time to find out what happened to her." Alice June wasn't so sure. "I don't know if it's a good idea. If she wanted to find us, she would have looked already, don't you think? Maybe it's better to leave the past where it is." "Or maybe she couldn't look for us," countered Charles. "Maybe she tried and couldn't. Or maybe she thinks we're no longer interested in knowing her." Sarah, who had been silent listening to the conversation between the siblings, decided to intervene. "Can I make a suggestion? How about we continue the investigation, but without creating very high expectations? If we find any trace of her, then you decide whether you want to make contact or not." The proposal seemed reasonable to everyone. They agreed they would spend a few more days together, visiting the places where Martha had been with the children, trying to reconstruct the family's last moments together. The first stop was Lake Placid, to visit Aunt Joan. The 80-year-old woman was moved to see her 3 grandnieces and nephews reunited. "My goodness, you've all grown so much," she exclaimed, hugging each one affectionately. "Martha would be so happy to know you found each other." Aunt Joan showed other items she had kept from the time Martha stayed at her house. Some of the children's toys, a shawl Martha used to keep warm, a cloth doll that belonged to Alice June. "I always hoped you'd come back one day," she said. "That's why I kept these little things so carefully." It was Aunt Joan who gave the next important clue in the search for Martha. "There's something I never told anyone," she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "A few years after Martha disappeared, I received a letter from her." The 3 siblings looked at each other, surprised. "A letter? When? From where?" "It was in 1987, 3 years after she left here. The letter had no return address, but the postmark was from a town in rural Georgia, a place called Hot Springs." Aunt Joan went to an old trunk in her room and returned with an envelope yellowed with time. She wrote asking for forgiveness for disappearing like that, and asking if I had any news of the children. She said she was well, but couldn't return yet because it still wasn't safe. The letter was short and cautious, as if Martha was afraid someone might intercept it. "Dearest Aunt, I hope you are in good health. I am well, working and trying to rebuild my life. I think of my children every day and pray they are being well cared for. When it is possible, I will return to look for them. Please, if you know anything about them, send news. With love, M." "Did you reply to the letter?" "I tried, but I had no address to send it to. I wrote a letter saying the children had been adopted and were well cared for, but I didn't know how to get it to her." Hot Springs. It was the first concrete clue about Martha's whereabouts after 1984. Even though it was a clue from almost 40 years ago, it was a starting point. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, the 3 siblings decided to extend their search to Georgia. Mary Martha asked her husband to look after the farm for a few more days. Charles managed to get more time off work, and Alice June spoke with the school principal about the situation. "This is more important than anything in the world," said Alice June's principal, who was moved by the story. "Go find your mother. Classes can wait." The trip to Hot Springs was full of anticipation and nervousness. It was possible Martha was still living in the city, or at least that someone would remember her. Hot Springs was a tourist town known for its thermal waters and natural beauty. It had about 100,000 inhabitants, which made the search harder than in a small town, but not impossible. Following the same strategy that had worked before, they started by asking at the town's oldest establishments. The first clue came from a pharmacy that had been operating since the 60s. Martha Miller Thompson, that name sounds familiar, said the pharmacist, an elderly man with white hair. There was a woman by that name who worked here as a clerk in the late 80s, a very reserved woman, hard-working but always a bit sad. Sarah's heart raced. Could it be her? Do you remember anything else about her? I remember she lived in a boarding house near the bus station, a simple but clean place. And I remember she always asked if I knew anyone who worked in missing persons searches. At the time, I thought it was strange, but now I understand she might have been looking for her children. Does she still work here? No, she left in the 90s, said she'd gotten a better job with a family, as a housekeeper. I never saw her again after that. It was a hot lead, but still insufficient to confirm if it was really Martha. The pharmacist had no photos from that time, and his description was very general. They decided to look for the boarding house he had mentioned. The place still existed, now run by the daughter of the former owner, a lady named Mrs. Lords. Martha Miller? Of course I remember her, exclaimed Mrs. Lords when she heard the name. She lived here for almost 5 years, the hardest working and most honest woman I've ever known. Mrs. Lords went to fetch an old photo album from the boarding house, where she recorded some special moments of the guests. Look, here she is, at a Christmas party we had in 1989. The photo was faded, but you could recognize a blonde woman, thinner and more aged than the Martha from the camper van photos, but with the same sad eyes and the same face shape. Alice June began to cry upon seeing the image. It's her. It's our mother. Even after all these years, I would recognize those eyes anywhere. Where did she go when she left here? Asked Charles, emotional. She got a job with a very wealthy family in town, the Sterlings, owners of some factories here in the region. They were looking for a housekeeper to take care of the house, and she applied. Since she had good references here at the boarding house, they hired her. Mrs. Lords explained that Martha had worked at the Sterling family home for many years, but had lost contact with her when the boarding house moved. She was a very private person, you know, never talked much about the past, never had visitors, never mentioned family. But you could see she carried a great sadness in her heart. The Sterling family wasn't hard to locate. They were known in town as successful business people and philanthropists. They lived in a mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Hot Springs. Sarah called the house and explained the situation to the family's secretary. After a few transfers, she managed to speak directly with Mrs. Clara Sterling, the family matriarch. Martha Miller? Our dear Martha, said Mrs. Clara, with evident affection in her voice. She worked here for over 20 years. She was like family. She took care of the house and us with great dedication. Does she still work for you? No, she retired about 5 years ago. We offered for her to keep living here, but she said she wanted her independence. We rented a small apartment for her in the city center, and we continue to help with the expenses. Sarah could hardly believe it. Martha was alive, she was well, and she lived right there in Hot Springs. Would it be possible for us to meet her? Of course, dear, but may I ask what your relationship is with Martha? Sarah briefly explained the story. Mrs. Clara was moved to learn that Martha would finally be reunited with the children she had searched for over decades. She always spoke of her children, Mrs. Clara shared. She never gave me details, but I knew she had lost 3 children under sad circumstances and that she lived in hope of one day finding them again. Mrs. Clara offered to mediate the first contact so that Martha wouldn't have too great a shock. I'll go to her apartment tomorrow morning and I'll pave the way. Then you can go there to meet her. That night, in the hotel in Hot Springs, the 3 siblings could barely sleep. After more than 40 years apart, they were finally going to see their mother again. Do you think she'll recognize us? Asked Mary Martha nervously. I think a mother never forgets her children, replied Alice June, even after so much time. The next morning, Mrs. Clara called the hotel. Kids, come over here. Martha is here at the house waiting for you. She cried a lot when she found out you were looking for her. Martha's apartment was small and simple, but very tidy and cozy. There were plants in the windows, some books on a shelf, and many photos scattered around the home. Photos of children who were clearly the 3 children at various ages. Martha waited for them sitting on the living room sofa, holding in her hands an old photo where she appeared with her 3 small children. At 80 years old, she was more frail and with completely white hair, but her eyes were still the same as in the photos from her youth. When the 3 siblings entered the room, Martha stood up slowly and looked at them one by one, as if she wanted to etch that moment into her memory forever. "My children," she whispered, her voice choked. "My dear children." The reunion was emotional. Alice June was the first to approach and hug her mother, followed by Charles and Mary Martha. The 4 of them stayed embraced for several minutes, crying and reuniting after decades apart. "Mum, why did you never come looking for us?" asked Charles, still holding her. "I tried, my son, I tried so hard," answered Martha, gently releasing herself from the hug. "But it was complicated. I didn't know where you were. I didn't have money to hire investigators, and I was afraid those bad men were still looking for me." Martha told her version of the story. After leaving the children in the foster care system in Seattle, she had stayed in the city for a few months, doing odd jobs and trying to save money to get the children back. But the situation became untenable when the same men who had threatened her family in Princeton began showing up in Seattle. They asked about me at the places where I worked. They threatened the people who helped me. I realized that as long as I stayed nearby, you would also be in danger. That's when she decided to move far away, hoping that with time the men would give up looking for her. I came to Hot Springs because it was a place where nobody knew me. I changed my way of speaking, my haircut, even my name I changed. I started calling myself Martha Smith instead of Martha Miller. And our father, what happened to him? Martha fell silent for a moment, clearly moved by the memory. David was a good man, hard-working, who loved you all very much. He had a small transport business taking goods from town to town in our camper van. It was a simple life, but we were happy. What went wrong? David started doing some hauls for a man from New York, someone who paid very well but was kind of mysterious. At first, David thought it was just normal merchandise, maybe something the man didn't want to declare on his taxes. Martha explained that David had discovered too late that he was transporting drugs. When he tried to leave the scheme, he was threatened and then disappeared. The last time I saw him, he said he was going to fix the situation, that he would talk to the men and explain he wanted out of the business. He said he'd be home that same day, but he never came back. Do you think that they hurt him? I don't know, my child. I never heard from David again. Maybe they hurt him. Maybe he ran away to protect us. Maybe he's alive somewhere far from here. It's a question that has tormented me for 40 years. The conversation continued for hours. Martha wanted to know everything about her children's lives, to learn the details she had missed during all those years. Alice June talked about her career as a teacher. Charles spoke about his work as a mechanic, and Mary Martha described her life in the country with her family. "You've become good, hard-working, honest people," said Martha with pride. "That makes me happy, because it means that even without me, you managed to find your way." "But we missed you," said Mary Martha. "There was always a hole in my life that's only now being filled." Martha then told how she had spent the last 40 years, always working as a maid or housekeeper, living a simple and reserved life, but always hoping to one day reunite with her children. "I went to church every week and asked God to give me a chance to see you again. I knew you were growing up, forming your own families, but I never stopped waiting for this day." It was Alice June who asked about the camper van. "Mom, how did our camper van end up with that man who sold it to Sarah? When I fled Seattle, I left the camper van hidden in a garage I rented monthly. I paid the rent for a whole year, hoping I could come back to get it, but I never could. After a while, I imagine the garage owner sold it to recover the money for the overdue monthly payments." Martha explained that she had hidden the letters and documents in the camper van because she knew that if she were caught by the men looking for her, at least there would be some record of her story and the love she felt for her children. "It was the only way to leave a message for you, in case something ever happened to me, and you came looking for me." Sarah, who had followed the whole conversation in silence, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Martha, I have a surprise for you." She told how she had bought the camper van and was restoring it to turn into her motorhome. But after learning the family's story, she had changed her mind. "I would like to give the camper van back to you. It belongs to the Miller-Thompson family, not to me." Martha was moved by the offer, but gently refused. "Dear, you bought the camper van honestly. It's rightfully yours. Besides, an 80-year-old lady doesn't have much use for a motorhome. But it has sentimental value for your family." "It truly does," Martha agreed. "But perhaps it's better for it to keep traveling, taking people to see new places and live adventures." That was always her spirit. Charles had a different idea. "What if we did it like this? Sarah finishes restoring the camper van, and then we take some family trips in it, like a reunion project, visiting the places we went when we were little." The idea excited everyone. Martha said she would love to revisit Lake Placid to personally thank Aunt Joan for having taken care of the children with so much affection. Alice June wanted to show her mother the town where she had grown up and introduce her to her adoptive family. Charles dreamed of taking Martha to see his workshop and his old cars. Mary Martha wanted her mother to meet the farm, her husband, and the grandchildren she had never seen. "And Princeton?" asked Martha. "Do you think anything from our old house still exists?" "No, Mom," answered Alice June. "The house was destroyed in the fire, but we can still go there, so you can make peace with that place." They spent 2 more days in Hot Springs, taking the opportunity to get to know each other better and plan the trips they would take together. Martha introduced her children to Mrs. Clara and to other people in town who had been important in her life. "It's a miracle," commented Mrs. Clara. "In 20 years of working here in my home, Martha had never been as happy as she is now." Before returning to their cities, they arranged to meet again in 3 months, when Sarah had finished restoring the camper van. The first trip would be to Lake Placid, so Martha could see Aunt Joan again. The reunion between Martha and Aunt Joan 3 months later was emotional. The 2 ladies hugged and cried like 2 sisters who hadn't seen each other for decades. "I knew you'd come back one day," said Aunt Joan. "I always had faith that our family would be reunited." The restored camper van looked beautiful. Sarah had kept the original white color with yellow details, but now the paint was shiny and new. Inside it had a small kitchen, a table that turned into a bed, shelves for books and clothes, and even a little corner for Sarah's guitar. "It's perfect," said Martha, running her hand lovingly over the body. "Just like it was when David and I traveled with you as little kids." The trip to Lake Placid was special for everyone. Martha recalled stories from when her children were small, told adventures they had lived on the road, sang the same lullabies that Alice June still remembered. "Look there, the place where your father taught you to drive," she said to Charles, pointing to an empty parking lot on a curve in the road. "You were 8 years old and insisted you already knew how to drive better than he did." The trips became a family ritual. Every 2 months they would meet to explore a new place or revisit some important location from their memories. Mary Martha took everyone to see her farm. Charles showed his workshop and taught Martha to identify the different models of camper van. Alice June organized a special dinner at the school where she worked, introducing her mother to all the colleagues who had followed her search. During one of the trips, Martha made a revelation that surprised everyone. "I have a confession to make," she said, while they were camping on a beach on the California coast. "All these years I saved some money hoping for the day I would find you." She explained that she had saved a small amount every month during the decades she worked as a housekeeper. "It's not much, but it's enough to help us take more trips together, or for anything you might need." Charles immediately protested. "Mom, you don't need to spend your savings on us. We're all doing well. We can pay for our own trips." "It's not about need. It's about want," Martha replied. "I spent 40 years without being able to give anything to my children. Now I at least want to be able to contribute to our happiness." It was Mary Martha who had the idea that ended up being accepted by everyone. "What if we used this money to take a special trip? A long trip visiting all the places that were important to our family?" The idea evolved into a bigger project. They decided to spend 2 months traveling across the entire United States in the restored camper van, not just visiting places from the past, but also discovering new places and creating fresh memories. Sarah Miller offered to accompany the family on the trip, since she knew the camper van well and could help with any mechanical problems. Besides, she had become almost a member of the Miller-Thompson family, considered by everyone as the person who had made the reunion possible. "You're our adopted daughter," Martha would joke. "If it weren't for you, we would never have found each other again." The 2-month trip started in New York, passing through Princeton, so Martha could make peace with the place where her life had completely changed. They visited the lot where the old family house used to be, now occupied by a small business. "I don't feel anger anymore," said Martha, standing on the sidewalk in front of the place. "Just sadness for what could have been, but mostly gratitude for what we managed to build afterward." From Princeton, they headed to the Pacific Northwest, visiting the small towns that were marked on the old map Sarah had found in the box. In each place, they tried to discover some story, some memory, some trace of the family's passage in the 80s. In some towns, they found people who vaguely remembered the young family traveling in the camper van with 3 small children. In others, there was no longer any trace of the past. "It doesn't matter," Martha would say whenever they found nothing. "What's important is that we are here now, together, creating new memories." The trip took them to Oregon, where they visited Aspen, a town Martha had mentioned in one of the letters as one of the destinations from the family's old plans. "David always wanted to bring me here in the winter for us to see the snow," Martha told them as they walked through the tourist town center. "He said it would be romantic to walk hand in hand in the cold." They stayed a week in Aspen, taking the opportunity to rest and enjoy each other's company. Martha seemed to grow younger with each day of the trip. The sparkle had returned to her eyes, and she laughed with a frequency her children couldn't remember seeing before. "Mom is becoming like she was before," Alice June commented to Charles and Mary Martha one morning while Martha was still sleeping. "You can see she's finally at peace." From Aspen, they headed to Florida, a region none of them knew. Martha said she had always been curious to see the warm water beaches and the places where winter didn't exist. In Florida, they stopped in a small town called Key West, where they camped on a practically deserted beach. It was there that Martha made another important revelation. "I want to tell you something about your father," she said one night as they watched the stars. "David left a letter for you." The 3 children looked at each other, surprised. "A letter? Where?" Martha went to her bag and took out a yellowed, sealed envelope. "He gave me this letter on the last night he spent at home before disappearing. He said that if anything happened to him, I should give it to you when you grew up." Martha had kept the letter for 40 years, waiting for the right moment to deliver it. "Why did you never open it?" "Because it wasn't for me. It was for you." Charles was the first to offer to read the letter aloud. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and unfolded the paper. "My dear children, if you're reading this letter, it means something has happened to me, and that your mother managed to survive and find you again. First, I want to say that I love you more than anything in the world, and that everything I did was to try to protect our family. I made a very big mistake by agreeing to do some jobs for bad people. When I discovered I was being used for wrong things, it was already too late to leave without consequences. These people don't forgive anyone who tries to leave their business. If I disappeared, it's because I thought it was the only way to protect you and your mother. Maybe they'll leave me alone if I stay away from you. Or maybe not, but at least you'll be safe. Alice June, my eldest daughter, always take care of your younger siblings. You have a good heart and a special intelligence. Charles, my son, always be honest and hard-working. You have skillful hands and can fix anything broken. Mary Martha, my little baby, always grow up with joy and never lose your innocence. Martha, my love, forgive me for putting our family in this situation. You are the strongest and bravest woman I know. I know you'll take good care of our children, and that one day, when it's safe, you'll be reunited and be happy again. God willing, maybe one day I can return to you. But if that's not possible, I want you to know that I will carry you in my heart until the last day of my life. With all my eternal love, David." The letter moved the whole family. It was the farewell David had never been able to give in person, but which reached them at the right time when they were finally reunited again. "Daddy loved us," said Mary Martha, crying. "He didn't abandon us. He sacrificed himself to protect us. And now we know he would be happy to see we managed to find each other again," added Alice June. Martha carefully stored the letter, along with the other family documents. Now they had a complete archive of their history, the love letters between Martha and David, the photos from the happy times, the children's birth certificates and the father's final letter. The trip continued for a few more weeks. They visited Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, New Orleans. In each city they took the opportunity to learn about the local culture, try the typical food, talk to people in the squares and markets. Martha showed curiosity about everything, like a child discovering the world for the first time. "I spent 40 years living a very small life," she explained to Sarah. "I worked, went home, slept, and repeated it all the next day. Now I'm discovering that the United States is much bigger and more interesting than I imagined." In New Orleans, they had an unexpected surprise. While walking through the historic center, an elderly man approached them on the street. "Sorry to bother you, but aren't you the family that was traveling in a camper van in the 80s? Everyone stopped, surprised. The man introduced himself as Thomas and said he had been a truck driver for decades. "I remember you because at the time it was very rare to see a whole family traveling like that. You stopped at my gas station several times, always very friendly, always with the children well cared for." Thomas pointed to Martha. "You're the same blonde lady from back then, aren't you?" Martha confirmed, intrigued. Thomas then said he remembered another important detail. "Once your husband came to my station alone, very worried. He said he was in trouble and asked if I knew of some faraway place where you could stay hidden for a while." "And what did you tell him?" "I said I knew a family in rural Alabama, very good people who could help. I even drew a little map for him to get there, but I never saw you again after that." The information was like a puzzle piece falling into place. David had found a safe place to hide the family, but something had gone wrong before they could get there. "Do you remember if this place is far from here?" Thomas scratched his head, trying to remember. "It's about 200 kilometers inland in a small town called El Paso. The family I knew had a farm there, very religious and charitable people. Charles asked if it was worth visiting the place just to completely close the loop of the investigation." "It wouldn't hurt to swing by there," agreed Martha. "Maybe we'll discover something more about the plans David had to protect us." The trip to El Paso took a full day on back roads. The town was small and welcoming, with fewer than 50,000 inhabitants. Following the directions Thomas had given, they found the family farm that was supposed to help David. The family patriarch, Mr. Peter, was a 70-year-old man who welcomed them with the typical hospitality of the rural South. "David Miller Thompson. Of course I remember him," said Mr. Peter when he heard the story. "He showed up here in 1984, alone, desperate, asking for help." Mr. Peter recounted that David had spent 2 weeks at the farm, working to pay for his stay and planning how he would bring the family to hide there. He was a good man, a hard worker, but you could see he was very afraid of something. He said there were bad people after him and that he needed to protect his family. What happened to him? One morning he woke up and said he had to go back to get you all. He promised he'd return in a few weeks with his wife and children, but he never showed up again. Mr. Peter had kept for decades some things David had left at the farm: clothes, some tools, and a small notebook where he had jotted down some plans. "I always hoped that one day he'd come back for these things," said Mr. Peter, handing the objects to Martha. "Now you can have them." In the notebook, David had noted various ideas for how to rebuild the family's life in rural Alabama. He wanted to buy a small plot of land, plant some crops, raise chickens. He dreamed of a simple and safe life, far from the troubles that had forced them to flee. "He really loved us," said Martha, flipping through the notebook with tears in her eyes. "He was willing to completely change his life to protect us." The discovery brought a sense of closure to the whole family. Now they knew exactly what David's plans were, why he had disappeared, and what his final intention was. "Dad wanted us to be happy," summarized Mary Martha, "and in a way we managed to be happy, each in our own way, even without him." They spent a few more days at Mr. Peter's farm, enjoying the southern hospitality and resting from the long journey. Martha was charmed by the simplicity of rural life and joked that she would like to stay there longer. After a whole lifetime running from problems, it's good to find a place where one can be at peace, she commented. But the time came for them to return to their cities. The 2-month trip had been perfect, providing the reunion everyone had dreamed of and filling the gaps in the family history that had been left open for decades. During the return trip, they passed through Hot Springs again so Martha could pack her things and say goodbye to the friends she had made in town. "I'm going to miss this place," she said to Mrs. Clara. "But now I have a whole family waiting for me. I don't need to live alone anymore." Martha had made an important decision during the trip. She no longer wanted to live alone in Hot Springs. She wanted to stay close to her children, actively participate in their lives, and get to know the grandchildren she hadn't yet had the chance to spend time with. After long conversations, they decided that Martha would spend a few months of the year at each child's home. She would stay 3 months with Alice June in Seattle, 3 months with Charles in Des Moines, 3 months with Mary Martha at the ranch in Pella, and 3 months free to travel or do whatever she wished. "This way I can make up for lost time with each of you," explained Martha. "And you help me not to be alone in my old age." Sarah also made an important decision. The story of the Miller-Thompson family had completely changed her perspective on life. She decided she no longer wanted to travel alone. "You've shown me that the best adventures are the ones we share with people we love," she said to the family. "I want to continue being part of your lives if you'll allow me." Martha was the first to respond. "Dear, you are already part of our family. You're the one who brought us back to each other." They agreed that Sarah would keep the camper van, but that they would take regular trips together. Each year, they would choose a new destination to explore as a family. The first Christmas of the reunited family was celebrated at Mary Martha's ranch. Everyone was there. Martha, Alice June with her husband and children, Charles with his wife, Mary Martha with her husband and 2 teenage children, and Sarah, who was already considered an official member of the family. 40 years ago, I never imagined I would one day be celebrating Christmas with my children, sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, and grandchildren, said Martha during the dinner. God truly works miracles. Alice June made an emotional toast. To Dad David, who sacrificed himself to protect us, to Mom Martha, who never gave up on finding us, and to Sarah, who made this reunion possible. Everyone toasted, deeply moved. The camper van was parked in the ranch yard, illuminated by the Christmas lights Mary Martha had put up. It seemed to smile, satisfied at having fulfilled its role of reuniting that family. The day after Christmas, Martha made another surprising revelation. "I have one last confession to make," she said during breakfast. "All these years I wrote letters to you." She explained that every week she wrote letters addressed to her children, telling them about her life, her thoughts, her longing. She kept all the letters in a box, waiting for the day she could deliver them. "There are over 2,000 letters," she said, "one for each week of these 40 years. The letters became a treasure for the children. Each took a portion to read slowly, discovering how their mother had lived through each stage of their lives even while being far away. In one letter, Martha had written, "Today my son Charles turned 15. He must be learning to drive like all boys that age. I hope he's careful in traffic and that his father is there to teach him the safety rules." In another, "Alice June must be finishing high school this year. She was always the most studious of the 3. I'm sure she wants to go to college. I hope she gets a scholarship because tuition must be expensive." And another, "My Mary Martha must be a beautiful young lady by now. I hope she has found a good young man to date, someone who treats her with affection and respect." It was moving to discover how Martha had mentally followed her children's growth, imagining their life stages, their challenges, their achievements. "Mom was with us the whole time," commented Charles. "Even far away, she never abandoned us, not for a single day." As the months passed, the family's new routine was established. Martha rotated between her children's homes, participating in each one's daily life, getting to know her grandchildren better, helping with childcare. In Seattle, she accompanied Alice June to her work at the school, marveling at her daughter's dedication as a teacher. In Des Moines, she helped Charles in the workshop, showing she still remembered many things about mechanics she had learned from David. At the farm, she discovered she liked country life and began helping Mary Martha with the garden and the animals. "I'm living 3 different lives," Martha would joke. "In the big city, in the mid-sized city, and in the countryside. It's like I'm recovering all the experiences I missed." Sarah continued her trips in the camper van, but now she always sent photos and stories to the family group on WhatsApp. At least once a month, she would spend a few days with Martha in whichever city she was in. "You've become like a daughter to me," Martha would say to Sarah. "A daughter God gave me as a gift to make up for the years I was away from the other 3. 2 years after the reunion, the Miller-Thompson family grew again. Alice June had another child, a boy who was named David, in honor of the grandfather he never met. "Now Dad will also be present in our family," said Alice June at the baby's baptism, "through this little grandson, who will carry his name with pride." Martha cried with emotion as she held her newborn grandson. "David would be so happy to know the family kept growing," she whispered to the baby in her arms, "that the love he planted in us generated even more love." Charles also had news. He decided to expand his workshop and specialize in restoring old camper vans. He created a thriving business, helping other people restore vehicles with sentimental value. "It's my way of repaying what the camper van did for our family," he would explain to customers. "Every car I restore could be the start of a new love story." Mary Martha convinced her husband to turn part of the farm into a rural tourism spot, hosting families who wanted to experience country life. The restored camper van was always on display there, and Mary Martha loved telling visitors the story of how that vehicle had reunited her family. "People get emotional about our story," she would say. "Many leave here determined to look for distant relatives or to value the family they already have more." Sarah decided to use her skills as an architect for a special project. She created a website and a YouTube channel where she documented stories of families who had reunited through old objects. The Miller-Thompson family story was the first to be told, inspiring hundreds of people to search for lost relatives. "I discovered there are many families separated by difficult circumstances," she explained in an interview. "And sometimes a simple object like an old camper van can be the key to a reunion." Sarah's channel became so successful that she was invited to participate in television programs, telling the story of the Miller-Thompson family and encouraging others not to give up searching for lost family members. During one of these TV appearances, something unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman called the program saying he had information about David Miller-Thompson. "I knew this man," the gentleman said over the phone live. "He worked for me for a few years here in Montana on a cattle ranch. He was always very reserved, but he was a great employee." Martha, who was watching the program with her children, felt her heart race. "When was this?" asked the host. "From the mid-80s to the early 90s. His name was David, but he didn't use the surname Thompson. He said he was David Smith, but from the photos you showed, I'm sure it's the same person." The call set the whole family in motion. Could it be that David was alive? Could he have managed to hide in Montana all these years? The rancher, whose name was Peter, agreed to meet the family for a personal conversation. Mrs. Martha, despite being 82, insisted on making the trip with her children. "If there's a chance David is alive, I need to go," she said, "even if it's just to find out what really happened to him." The ranch was in a remote region of Montana, several hours by road from the nearest town. Greg was a 60-year-old man who had inherited the property from his father and had run the cattle operation for decades. David worked here from 1986 until 1993, Greg recounted. He was responsible for the ranch's transport, taking cattle to the packing plants, bringing supplies from town. Very hard-working, very honest, but always a bit sad. Did he talk about family? Yes, he did. He said he had a wife and 3 children he had to leave behind because of trouble with dangerous people. He always hoped for the day he could return to them. Greg showed old photos of the ranch where David appeared with other workers. Mrs. Martha immediately recognized her husband's face, older and bearded, but unmistakably the same man she had loved. "It's him. It's my David," she whispered, holding the photo with trembling hands. "What happened to him in 1993?" asked Charles. "He fell ill. had heart problems and needed to be taken to the hospital in Helena. Unfortunately, he didn't survive the surgery. Mrs. Martha closed her eyes and took a deep breath. After almost 40 years, she finally knew what had happened to David. Did he say anything before the end? Yes, he did. He asked me to look for his family if anything happened, said his wife's name was Martha Miller and that they had 3 children, Alice June, Charles David, and Mary Martha. But back then we didn't have the internet. There was no way to do that search. Greg had kept some of David's personal belongings, a family photo he always carried in his wallet, a gold chain with a small medallion of the Virgin Mary, and a notebook where he wrote down thoughts and letters he never sent. He wrote letters to you every week, Greg told them. He always said that when it was safe, he'd send them all at once. But that day never came. David's letters were a mirror of the letters Mrs. Martha had written. He too had followed the children's growth in his mind, imagining how they would be, what they would be doing, if they were happy. In one letter he wrote, "Today my Alice June turns 16. She must be thinking about what career to follow. She was always smart and liked taking care of her younger siblings. Maybe she'll become a teacher or a nurse, some profession where she can help people." In another, "Charles must be almost 15 now. He always liked tinkering with engines and fixing broken things. I hope he's learning a trade that uses those skills. He'd make a good mechanic like his uncle." And another, "My baby Mary Martha must be a young lady now. I hope she grew up in a good family, that she was given lots of love and affection. I so wish I could see her in a wedding dress one day." "Daddy loved us until the end," cried Mary Martha. "Even far away, even alone, he never stopped thinking about us." Greg showed them the place where David was buried, a simple cemetery in the nearest town, with a headstone that read only David Silver, 1947-1993. "We'll change the headstone," decided Mrs. Martha. "He'll have his real name back and the information that he was loved by his family." The new headstone was placed a few weeks later, inscribed, "David Miller Thompson, beloved husband of Martha, cherished father of Alice June, Charles David, and Mary Martha, reunited with family forever." The discovery of David's fate brought a mixture of sadness and relief to the whole family. Sadness at confirming he had truly passed, but relief in knowing he had managed to hide, live in safety for a few years, and that he had thought of his family until the end. "At least now we know he found a safe place," said Alice June, "and that he lived with dignity, working honestly until the end of his life." Martha decided she wanted to spend a few days each year visiting David's grave in Montana. Greg invited her to stay at the ranch whenever she wanted, saying it would be an honor to host the widow of the man who had been so important to the property. "David spoke of you all so much that I feel as if I've known the whole family for years," said Greg. "You will always have a home here." In the following years, the Miller-Thompson family's life settled into a happy routine. Martha continued rotating between her children's homes, actively participating in raising her grandchildren, being a constant and loving presence in all their lives. Charles became known throughout Oregon as the specialist in restoring camper vans. His schedule was always full, and he developed a reputation for being able to bring any Heritage Motors vehicle back to life, no matter how deteriorated. Alice June was promoted to principal of the school where she worked and implemented a special oral history project where students interviewed elderly community members to preserve family memories. The project was inspired by her own family's story. Mary Martha transformed the ranch into one of the most sought-after rural tourism destinations in the region. Families came from various states to experience a few days in the countryside, always hearing the emotional story of the camper van that reunited a separated family. Sarah continued documenting stories of family reunions through old objects. Her channel grew so much that she managed to help dozens of families reunite, becoming a reference on the subject. The camper van continued to be the star of adventures. Once a year, the entire family gathered for a special trip, always to a new destination, always creating memories that made up for the lost years. On the 5th anniversary of the reunion, Martha made a special request. "I want us to take a trip to Montana, to visit David's grave and thank Greg. But I want to go in the camper van as a real family." The trip was emotional. 3 generations of the Miller-Thompson family traveled together in the restored camper van. Martha, her 3 children with their spouses, 5 grandchildren of various ages, and Sarah, who was now officially considered an adopted daughter. "David would be proud to see how our family has grown," said Martha, watching the grandchildren playing in the yard of Greg's ranch. At the cemetery, everyone left flowers on David's grave and said a prayer of thanks. Martha had a moment alone with her husband, where she could finally say a proper goodbye. "My love, I managed to take care of our children as you asked," she whispered to the headstone. "They grew up good, honest, hard-working. They started their own families and had beautiful children who are our continuation. You can rest in peace." On the return trip, Martha surprised everyone with another decision. "I want to spend my final years traveling," she announced. "I want to see the entire United States with you, enjoying every moment God still gives us together." The idea evolved into a permanent family project. They decided to spend 3 months each year traveling all together, exploring different regions of the country, always in the faithful camper van that had made their reunion possible. "Our family was separated by the force of circumstances," Charles summarized in an interview for a documentary a production company decided to make about their story. "But true love always finds its way back." The story of the Miller-Thompson family became known throughout the United States. They became an example of perseverance, of family love, of how we should never give up searching for those we love. Martha, at 85 years old, became a kind of involuntary celebrity. She received letters from people across the entire country, telling their own stories of family separation and asking for advice on how to search for lost relatives. "The secret is to never lose hope," she would always reply. "True love is stronger than any circumstance. It might take 40 years, but if it's meant to be, it will happen." The camper van, now over 50 years old, continued to travel the American roads, carrying the family it had helped reunite. Sarah took care of its maintenance with religious zeal, ensuring the vehicle remained in perfect condition for many more years. "She's more than a car," Sarah would say. "She's a member of the family, the guardian of our memories, the proof that miracles can happen when we least expect them." On the 10th anniversary of the reunion, the family organized a special party at Mary Martha's farm. They invited all the people who had been important on the journey: Aunt Joan, now 90 years old; Greg Paul, the pharmacist from Hot Springs; Mrs. Clara Sterling, and many others. "10 years ago, I was a lonely woman living on memories," said Martha in an emotional speech. "Today I have a huge family full of love, full of life. We proved that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to be happy." The party lasted 3 days. The camper van was parked in the center of the yard, decorated with flowers and colorful ribbons, receiving visitors as if it were a sacred relic. "How many stories this camper van must hold over the years," commented one of the guests. "How many families it has transported, how many dreams it has fulfilled, how many tears and smiles it has witnessed." The children of the family, which now included 8 grandchildren of various ages, loved to play inside the camper van, listening to the stories the adults told about the adventures they had lived in that space. "It's like it's magic," said little Pete, Alice June's youngest grandson. "A camper van that brings a separated family together has to have some magic." Martha laughed at her grandson's innocence, but secretly believed that maybe he wasn't completely wrong. There was something special about that vehicle, something that went beyond rational explanation. During the party, Sarah made a special announcement. "I've decided to write a book telling the complete story of the Miller-Thompson family," she said. "With everyone's permission, I want to turn this story into a book that can inspire other people to never give up searching for those they love." The book was launched 2 years later, becoming a national bestseller. The income from the royalties was divided equally among all family members, allowing them to take even more trips together, and for Martha to fulfill an old dream of creating a foundation to help separated families reunite. The David and Martha Miller-Thompson Foundation started small but grew quickly, with donations from people moved by the story. It offered free investigation services for families who had lost contact, maintained a database of people searching for relatives, and provided emotional support for those going through similar situations. It's our way of giving back the happiness we received, explained Alice June, who became the Foundation's president. If our story can help other families reunite, then all the suffering we went through will have been worth it. Charles developed a partnership with the Foundation, offering his restoration services at a discount to people who found vehicles with sentimental value during their searches for family members. Mary Martha made the farm available for retreats for families who had recently been reunited and needed a peaceful place to reconnect. Sarah became the Foundation's communications coordinator, using her media experience to bring visibility to cases of people searching for relatives. Her YouTube channel became an official platform for the Foundation, documenting reunions and offering practical search tips. Martha, despite her advanced age, insisted on actively participating in the Foundation's activities. She personally welcomed the families who managed to reunite through the services offered, sharing her experience and offering emotional support. "Every reunion we help facilitate is like our own family growing a little bigger," she would say, always moved to witness the embraces of families finding each other after years apart. The camper van became the official symbol of the Foundation. Sarah would take it to events and lectures, where it was displayed as a concrete example of how seemingly simple objects can change entire lives. At one such exhibition, at an antique fair in New York, another incredible coincidence occurred. An elderly lady approached the camper van with tears in her eyes. "Is this Martha's camper van?" she asked, trembling with emotion. Sarah confirmed, intrigued by the woman's reaction. "I'm Brenda, Martha's childhood friend in Seattle. I took her in when she arrived there with the 3 children in 1984. It was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Brenda said she had searched for Martha for decades, but had never been able to find her. When she left my house that morning with the children, I never knew what happened to her. I always blamed myself for not insisting more that she stay, for not offering more help." The reunion between Martha and Brenda, after 40 years, was emotional. The two friends hugged and cried, remembering the difficult days they had spent together and celebrating the fact that Martha had managed to survive and find happiness. "You were fundamental in my story," Martha said to Brenda. "If it weren't for your hospitality during those days in Seattle, I wouldn't have had the strength to keep fighting." Brenda became an active collaborator with the Foundation, offering her home in Seattle as a support point for people searching for family in the region. At 90 years old, Martha continued to travel and participate in the Foundation's activities, but her pace had naturally slowed. Doctors recommended she take shorter trips and rest more. "I've already lived longer than I imagined I would," she would tell the family. "And I've lived with much more happiness than I thought possible after everything we went through." One Sunday afternoon, during a family lunch at Mary Martha's farm, Martha made a special request. "I want you all to promise me one thing," she said, gathering all her children, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, and grandchildren around her. "When my time comes, I want you to keep getting together, keep traveling together, keep being a united family." "Mom, don't talk like that," protested Alice June. "You're going to live many more years." "Maybe yes, maybe no," Martha replied serenely. "But what's important is that now you know you are a family, that you love each other, that you can count on each other. That is something no one will ever be able to take away from you." Martha made a point of recording videos for each grandchild, leaving personal messages they could watch when they were older. She also wrote letters to the great-grandchildren who hadn't even been born yet, so they would know about the family's history and the love that had overcome all difficulties. The camper van continued to be the center of attention at all family gatherings. Martha enjoyed sitting in the driver's seat and pretending she was driving, reminiscing about the trips she had taken with David in their youth. "When I was young, driving a camper van was the height of modernity," she would tell her grandchildren. "We felt free, adventurous, capable of going anywhere in the world." In one of these nostalgic moments, Martha had an idea that filled the family with emotion. "I want to take one last great trip in the camper van," she announced. "I want to visit all the important places in our history, one last time with the whole family together." The trip was planned as a special 3-week expedition, passing through all the significant locations of the family saga. Princeton, where it all began; Lake Placid, where Aunt Joan had taken them in; Seattle, where the children had been separated; Hot Springs, where Martha had rebuilt her life, and Montana, where David had found peace. It was an emotional and tiring journey. Martha, despite her age, insisted on participating in every moment, visiting each place, talking with every person who had been important on her journey. "It's as if I'm closing a cycle," she said during the visit to David's grave. "It started here with our young family, went through many hardships, but ends with our large and happy family." On the return trip, Martha slept almost the whole time, tired but satisfied. She had fulfilled her mission to revisit her entire history and to ensure the family would remain united. 2 weeks after returning from the trip, Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep at Alice June's house in Seattle. She was surrounded by all her children, who had sensed the end was near and took turns staying with her. The wake was held at Mary Martha's farm, the place Martha had loved most in her final years. The camper van was parked beside the coffin, covered in flowers and family photographs. "She fulfilled her mission," said the priest during the Mass. "She reunited her family, passed on her love to several generations, and left a legacy of hope for thousands of people through the foundation." Martha was buried in the cemetery in Pella, next to the tomb that had been prepared for David when his remains were transferred from Montana. The headstone read, "Martha and David Miller Thompson. Together in life, separated by circumstance, reunited for eternity." Martha's death brought great sadness to the whole family, but also a feeling of a mission accomplished. She had managed to realize all her dreams, to reunite with her children, to know her grandchildren, to see the family grow and prosper. The David and Martha Miller Thompson Foundation continued operating, now managed by the children and coordinated by Sarah. The work grew even more, inspired by Martha's memory and the desire to continue her legacy. The camper van became a mobile memorial. The family decided it would keep traveling, but now it would be used specifically to bring the story of the Miller-Thompson family to schools, events, and family gatherings. Sarah became the official guardian of the vehicle. "The camper van can't stop traveling," said Charles during the family meeting where they decided the vehicle's fate. "That's what it always did, and it was through travel that our family was reunited." In the following years, the story of the Miller-Thompson family continued to inspire people across the entire United States. Sarah's book was adapted into a film, which moved millions of viewers and generated even more demand for the Foundation's services. Alice June retired from the school and dedicated herself fully to the Foundation. Charles expanded his restoration business, specializing in vehicles that had special family stories. Mary Martha transformed the farm into a retreat center for reunited families, offering a peaceful space for people reconnecting after years of separation. Sarah continued documenting stories of reunions, but now also traveled across the country, giving talks about the importance of family bonds and how we should never give up searching for those we love. The camper van, now over 60 years old, kept traveling the roads of the United States. It had become almost a national celebrity, recognized wherever it stopped. "It's incredible how a vehicle can become a symbol of hope," Sarah commented during one of the trips. "It's not just a means of transportation, it's concrete proof that miracles can happen." 10 years after Martha's death, the family continued to gather regularly for trips in the camper van. It now included a fourth generation, Martha's great-grandchildren, young children who listened with fascination to stories about the brave great-grandmother who never gave up finding her children. "Great-grandma Martha was a real hero," said little Sarah, the 6-year-old great-granddaughter who had been named in Sarah's honor. "She saved our family." The David and Martha Miller Thompson Foundation had become one of the country's most respected organizations in family reunion work. It had already facilitated over 1,000 reunions, always offering its services for free and relying on donations from people moved by the stories it helped resolve. In every reunion facilitated by the Foundation, a photo was taken next to the camper van, creating a giant album of happy families who had been inspired by the Miller-Thompson family's story to never give up searching for one another. "Our story proved that love really is stronger than anything," summarized Alice June in an interview celebrating the Foundation's 15th anniversary. "No matter how much time passes, no matter the difficulties, People who truly love each other always find a way to reunite. The camper van, carefully preserved by Sarah and Martha's children, remained the living symbol of this philosophy. On its walls were pasted hundreds of photos of families who had been reunited, each with its own moving story, but all connected by the same message of hope. On a sunny December afternoon, exactly 20 years after the Miller-Thompson family reunion, the camper van was parked in the central square of a small town in rural Georgia. Sarah, now 52, was organizing an exhibition about the family's history for the local residents. A child approached the vehicle curiously. "Ma'am, is this camper van really magic like everyone says?" Sarah smiled, remembering all the stories she had witnessed, all the families she had seen reunite, all the love that had been restored through that simple, special vehicle. "I don't know if it's magic, dear," she replied, stroking the yellow and white bodywork that still shone after so many years. "But I can guarantee you one thing. It is made of hope, of love, and of the certainty that we should never give up on the people we love." The child nodded, impressed, and ran off to tell friends about talking to the guardian of the magic camper van. Sarah stayed there a few more minutes, watching the activity in the square and thinking of Martha, who would be proud to see how her story continued to inspire people decades after her passing. As the sun began to set, Sarah got into the camper van and started the engine. It was time to continue the journey, to bring the Miller-Thompson family story to more people, to keep spreading the message that true love always finds a way back home. The yellow and white camper van disappeared down the road, carrying with it 40 years of history, countless tears of joy, and the certainty that some stories are so powerful they deserve to be told forever. End of story. And you? What did you think of this emotional story? Have you ever experienced a similar situation in your own family? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if you believe love can truly overcome any distance or difficulty. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one. Thank you so much for your company up to this point.